Hello, it's my pleasure to talk to you about the state of computer science education in Washington. This is a slidecast of a presentation that I gave at the Future Conference at Bellevue College on April 26, 2025. While the slides in this video are the same as those in the original presentation, the narration has been modified for this video. There are many resources in this presentation, and we will go quickly through these slides. And it'll go even quicker if you watch this at double speed. I highly recommend getting this slide deck using this QR code or the URL tinyurl.com state of CSE WA 25. My name is Lawrence Tanimoto. I'm the treasurer and advocacy lead of CSTA Washington. I am also involved with several other organizations mentioned in this presentation, advocating for computer science education in Washington and nationwide. I'm very grateful to Bellevue College for the opportunity to talk to you about the state of CS education in Washington. It represents much of what I've been working on since I retired from teaching. Before retiring, I was a CTE teacher at Ingram High School in North Seattle from 2014 to 2021, where I taught a wide variety of computer science courses. Prior to that, I spent 28 years in the international computer industry. The last 18 were with Microsoft. As I am retired, I have considerable time and freedom to investigate and talk about these issues. How many of the organizations and individuals that I work with do not. So I've added this disclaimer about my presentation today. So let's talk about my organization, CSTA Washington, which is helping to support this event. CSTA stands for Computer Science Teachers Association, and we are the local chapter in Washington. We provide community professional development, support, and advocacy for computer science teachers throughout Washington. We've gone through many changes over the past few months. In November, we merged the 4 CSTA chapters in Washington into a single statewide chapter. And in March, we moved to a unified membership system with the national organization and migrated to a new association management system to handle much of our communications and operations. To be honest, because of all of these changes, we're still figuring things out. I won't spend too much time talking about our organization and our activities today, except to advise you to go to our website, washington.csteachers.org, for all the latest info. One important contribution of CSTA Washington to this event is that we provided free professional development clock hours to attendees. Since this event is already over, I won't talk anymore about this. Now, this is my CS education story. And ChatGPT created this cartoon for me. One good thing about ChatGPT intelligence is that it certainly knows how to flatter its users. Now, I started teaching CS at Ingram High in North Seattle in 2014. Because I came out of the local tech industry, got so much support, and met so many bright CS students in my school, throughout Seattle, and here on the East Side, I thought CS education in Washington must be great. When I retired, I started looking for something to do and started investigating national and local CS education metrics and Washington CS education policy. And I came to the conclusion that CS education in Washington is actually quite mediocre. In this presentation today, I'm going to explain to you why I believe that CS education in Washington is mediocre. I'll show you some of the areas where Washington excels and some of the areas where we should be better. I hope this multi-dimensional view is a sense that you get from this particular presentation. So now let's talk about the state of CS education in Washington. Much of the education data or much of the national data that I will provide here will be from the State of Computer Science in Education 2024 report. You can get a soft copy from the URL advocacy.co.org/stateofcs. This yearly report is the main source of K-12 computer science education information in the nation. 3 organizations put out this report: the Code.org Advocacy Coalition, CSTA Washington's parent organization, the Computer Science Teachers Association, and another organization that I'm also involved with called the ESEP Alliance, Expanding Computing Education Pathways Alliance. While I'll show you a lot of data from this report, I will also be showing you data that we've compiled locally to provide further insight and a fuller version of where computer science education is at in Washington. So now let's look at access to participation. Access means whether students have access to CS. Participation is whether students are enrolled in CS courses. The main benchmark that the State of CS Education Report uses is to see how well computer science education is doing in our nation is what percentage of high schools provide CS courses. This chart shows that since 2017 and 18, the percentage of high schools offering CS in the US has steadily increased from 35% to 60%. This is good progress. Now, knowing that 60% of our nation's high schools provide computer science, what do you think the percentage is for Washington? Do you think it is A, 78%, B, 67%, C, 59%, D, 50%, or E, 45%? The answer is D, 50%. While 60% is the average, 50% puts us in the bottom quartile. According to this metric, Washington is not doing that great, right? But there are several nuances to this data that we'll talk about. This next slide again shows Washington at 50% and how it compares with other states geographically. Now, let's look at some of the nuances. Nationwide, we find that 2 main reasons why schools don't provide CS. The 2 main reasons are that the school is small, which gives them much less flexibility, or because they lack financial resources, indicated by the high percentage of free and reduced lunch for low. We can see how Washington does in these areas and how it compares to national. Now let's look at the effect of school size. In this chart here, you can see the dramatic effect that school size has on the availability of CS in high schools nationally. And you can see the even more dramatic effect that it has here in Washington. And for Washington, the effect of small schools is even more problematic because we have so many small schools. In fact, we have a huge number of extra small schools of less than 250 students and have even less flexibility that is not captured in the national data. Now let's look at the effect of free and reduced lunch rates or low student income rates on computer science availability. The chart on the left shows national data, right? You can see the trend downward, the higher percentage of students there are in the school. The chart on the right shows Washington data. Look at the green line here. If anything, the effect of high school or of high student FRL rates on the availability of computer science is even more dramatic in Washington than nationwide. So far, we have only explored providing access to computer science. But what about participation? What we really care about is for all students to take some computer science. Here is the nationwide statistics. Although 82% of all students have access to a computer science course, only 6% of all students enrolled in a computer science course. Despite only offering CS in 50% of its high schools, Washington provides 87% of its students with access to computer science courses. This is larger than the 82% of high school students nationwide that have access. As mentioned, 6% of high school students enrolled in CS nationwide, right? So here. Given these other stats, what do you think the percentage of students enrolled in CS in Washington is? Do you think it's A, 7.2%, B, 6.2%, C, 5.1%, D, 4.5%, or E, 3.9%? It is C, 5.1%. We're far below the national average of 6.4%. However, we are right around the middle in short. Still, you would think that Washington, especially being here in Bellevue, we would do a lot better, but we don't. I want to mention there are different sources and different numbers for both access and participation data. Different dashboards exist for some of this data. One is done by the ECEP Alliance, that is also a sponsor of the state of CS. They have another dashboard. This is a Washington version of their dashboard. This version shows us at 9% CS. And this dashboard is based upon project data provided by OSPI through the ECEP Carbon Metrics Project. Another dashboard is based on data that OSPI provides through its K-12 Computer Science Education Data Summary report that is published yearly and is posted on the CS for All Washington website. This shows us at 8.7. Now, this is the OSPI Computer Science website and the K-12 Computer Science Education Data Summary. I personally believe that Washington is the best state for reporting detailed computer science education data. Now, a few reasons why these different reports have different data. First, both the ECEP dashboard and the dashboards on the CS for All Washington websites are based on data that OSPI Computer Science actively compiles for public consumptions, whereas the data in the state of CS is collected by the report through other channels. Second is that the definition of a high school is somewhat different between the different dashboards. But the biggest difference is the definition of what a high school computer science course is. The State of CS Education report has a fairly narrow view of the course codes and titles that count as computer science. The ECEP dashboard and the CS for All Washington dashboards count a much larger set of courses and titles as CS. That's the reason why the participation rates are so much higher in the ECEP dashboard and the CS for All Washington dashboard than in the state of CS education. So far, we have only looked at basic access and participation data. Now we'll look at who's taking CS in our schools and how we compare nationally. So let's look at demographic data that is in the report and elsewhere. Gender participation data shows here. Nationally, a little over 2/3 of all high school students enrolled in CS are male. And in Washington, it's even a little bit higher. This is an issue facing K-12 CS education advocates nationwide. We still seem to be stuck near this 2/3 to 1/3 ratio, even as CS education has grown throughout the nation over the past 5 years. While Washington slightly trails national averages in gender equity in computer science, it does do much better in other areas. This slide shows participation by ethnicity. The way of reading this chart is that 45% of the nation's high schools are white, and 45% of the nation's high schools are white. As you can see from this slide, Hispanics, Latinx are the groups most underrepresented in CS enrollments nationwide. 29% of our nation's students are Hispanic Latinx, but only 20% of our CS students are. Interestingly, 15% of our nation's students are Black, and 17% of our CS students are. However, note that these statistics covers enrollments in all high school CS classes. Unfortunately, once we start looking at data for more advanced courses, such as AP test enrollments and scores, a more familiar pattern arises. And one of the interesting statistics that is rarely mentioned is that although only 5% of our nation's students are Asian, 13% of our CS students are. In other words, Asians enroll in CS courses at 260% that of whites nationwide. Now, this is Washington data, and it is formatted somewhat differently and has very different results. In fact, in 2022-23, Hispanics and Native Hawaiians had enrollment rates slightly higher than that of whites, although Blacks and Native Americans still trailed a little. And although Asians still participate in CS at a much higher rate than whites, it is not as drastic a difference as nationwide. I would say Washington is pretty good in race ethnicity distribution. Now let's look at the effect of income level. Again, Washington does well. You can see here that nationally, low-income students participate in computer science at 67% of the rate of all students, but that in Washington, it's a more reasonable 89%. It's even more interesting if you look at Washington data by school income level. The green line shows CS enrollment rates in schools that have CS courses. Right? The orange bar shows enrollment of low-income students, and the blue bar, that of non-low-income students. But what is interesting is that the CS Ed participation rate is much higher in the richest schools than elsewhere, right? And in these richest schools, you have a dramatic difference between the percentage of low-income students taking CS and non-low-income students taking CS. Elsewhere, the difference between low-income and non-low-income students is almost tolerable. Now, this is data that is only through grade, so participation by grade level is only available through the OSPI report and the dashboards on CS for All Washington. Participation in CS courses in Washington peaks in the 7th grade and decreases with each successive grade. Two causes for this is that there is more flexibility in our middle school schedule, and because schools can start getting enhanced CTE funding from the 7th grade. There's another interesting we've learned from OSPI data. If you look at the orange and red lines in this chart here on the right, the growth, much of the growth in CS education in Washington since the pandemic in our state has come from our middle schools. This slide shows that Washington provides fantastic data on middle school computer science. And this is fairly unique among all states. However, we provide no data on elementary school CS. In contrast, the State of CS report provides only limited data on middle school and elementary school CS for a limited number of states. Now, we won't have time in this presentation, but I did want to encourage you to view the dashboards on the CS for All Washington website. I actually created these using the OSPI report. These dashboards contain not only many of the data points shown in this presentation, but also allow you to drill down into CS education at the school, district, or even the ESD or Educational Service District level. I'd welcome any feedback on these. Another unique aspect of the data provided in the OSPI reports that is captured only on the CS All Washington website are the dashboards on our CS teachers. Through these dashboards, you can see where our CS teachers are, how many students they teach, and their demographics. To my knowledge, Washington is the only state that provides this level of detail on its teachers on a public dashboard. So now let's talk about the policy landscape. We saw what the data is, but what are the policies and procedures that produce these results? Again, the basis of our discussion will be the State of Computer Science Education 2024 report. The report does an excellent job of tracking the 10 policies shown here to make CS fundamental across all 50 states. We'll go into each of these policies one by one later, but now I'm going to ask you a question. Given what you know about CS education metrics in Washington, how many of the 10 policies do you think Washington has implemented, even partially? Is it A, all 10? Is it 8 or 9, 6 or 7, 4 or 5, or is it 3 or less? The answer is B, 8 or 9, as shown on this slide here. Having implemented 9 policies puts us in an elite group of states. This slide shows geographically how many each state has implemented. However, there is only a loose correlation between the number of policies implemented and the percentage of high schools offering CS and other statistics. As we've seen, although Washington has implemented 9 of the 10 policies, its access and participation numbers are still mediocre. We need to determine which of the 10 policies were implemented and how they were implemented to understand Washington's situation better. This looks at Washington policy scorecard from the report. You can see the one policy that we haven't implemented, a graduation requirement, the one policy that we've only partially implemented, pre-service, and the 8 policies in green that we have implemented. However, these red, yellow, green ratings are up to the interpretation of the report's writers. Now, I'd like to present an alternate interpretation or rating of Washington's policies. As you can see, this is why I was asked to put a disclaimer at the beginning of this presentation and why these ratings are called Lawrence's interpretation. After all, I'm already retired. Whereas in the official ratings, we had 8 green policies, 1 yellow and 1 red. In my rating system, we have only 3 green policies, 6 yellow, and 1 red. See, this is the official, and this is mine. Okay. Further, there's a lot of controversy in the computer science education community about whether these are the correct 10 policies to track, whether the current 10 policies should be modified, and whether there should be more. I will talk a little bit about these alternate policy ideas at the end. But I will use the 10 policies in the report as a basis for this presentation. The report does a good job of tracking these 10 policies in all 50 states, and we have to take advantage of that. Something no other set of CS education policy recommendations does. The first is computer science as a graduation requirement. It requires all students to take computer science to earn a high school diploma. This is a new requirement that was only added in 2023. Washington has been trying to implement a graduation requirement as it is the last of the 10 policies that it hasn't implemented. Last year, SB 5849 tried to implement a computer science competency requirement, but it stalled. This year, SB 5327 asks our Board of Education to develop recommendations to incorporate computer science competency into graduation requirements. That's a much weaker law, but even that seems to have stalled under budget considerations. In the meantime, the CS for All Washington Coalition that I am a member of did a focus group with several teachers and school districts last fall. They recommended that to implement a CS graduation requirement, they feel that the best thing to do would be to integrate CS into one or more subject areas, yet a very different implementation. So you can see that even though Washington has not yet implemented CS as a graduation requirement yet, it isn't for lack of trying. This slide shows the 12 states that have passed CS graduation requirements. And you can see that Washington is one of those that are under consideration. Now let's look at Washington's implementation of the other policies. The first is whether we have a state plan for computer science. Washington did publish a computer science education strategic plan in January of 2022. However, it was really only a collection of ideas that no one acted on. No one ever reviewed, benchmarked, or updated the plan after its initial publication. Further, the timeline set out in the plan is scheduled to end at the end of the 24-25 school year. For these reasons, while the official rating of this policy is green, I rated it as a yellow. Standards. Both the official rating and my rating for Washington are both green. The key thing to remember from these slides is that Washington standards for computer science are the same as the national ones published by CSTA, and that a revision is scheduled to be released in the summer of 2026. I'll also point out that there is a gap between establishing these standards and students actually learning the content associated with them. Funding. Here, the official rating is green, but I put it as a yellow. The summary for this policy is to allocate funding for rigorous computer science teacher professional learning. This rating is very much in the eye of the state legislature has budgeted for 2 grants earmarked to support computer science education. One is the FP 777 Computer Science Grant, which is granted up to $1 million per year since 2016-2017. The other is the AP Computer Science Initiative Grant, which granted up to $62K per year. However, I marked this as a yellow for a few reasons. First, an unknown percentage of this grant money is used for rigorous computer science teacher professional learning. The grant process doesn't track this information. More importantly, this funding for this grant did not get into their 2025-26 budget at all. And even if the funds were still available, there are still questions whether it would be sufficient to meet current policy requirements and a possible graduation requirement. Certification. Here is yet another one where the official rating for Washington is green, but I've rated it as a yellow. The summary of this policy is to implement clear certification pathways for computer science at the elementary and secondary levels. Via HB 1813 in 2015, Washington established a test-only computer science endorsement and created the Educator Retooling Scholarship to encourage teachers to obtain this endorsement. Teachers can now get up to $3,000 for getting a CS endorsement, which is more generous than many other states. Despite the availability of the test-only computer science endorsement, it is unclear what is necessary. It is still unclear what is necessary to become a CS teacher. You can look at this link here for more details. Some of the complexities are, first, most schools require a CTE certification to teach CS so that the school can receive enhanced funding from CTE courses. Getting a CTE certification can be quite time consuming, so it is a significant barrier to attracting current teachers to teach CS. In addition, there are several other endorsements that do not include CS as a competency that can teach CS. Yet another area of difficulty is that we have the same endorsement for all grade levels. So there's the same exam for elementary, middle, and high school teachers. This slide shows the effect of the CTE requirement and how small the effect of the CS endorsement has been since 2017. As of the 2022-23 school year, only 130 teachers have passed the CS endorsement exam. Pre-service. The summary for this policy is to create programs at institutions of higher learning to encourage all pre-service teachers to gain exposure to computer science. Both the official and my rating for this pre-service policy is yellow. Before 2023, this policy area for pre-service read, create pre-service programs for computer science at higher education institutions. Washington was green under this interpretation of the pre-service policy. Washington has 3 undergraduate computer science teaching programs and 4 master's programs. However, with the change to this policy rubric, Washington is now rated as yellow. Washington does not require all pre-service teachers to learn computer science. Further, this official rating is likely to turn red in the 2025 report. For the state CS position, we are all green. We have Teran Ishihara as our computer science program supervisor in OSPI, our Office of the Supervisor of Public Instruction. There are also CS representatives at each ESD, or Educational Service District. However, these ESD positions are all part-time positions shared with other roles and depend on FP 777 funding, which is now questionable. The next policy is requiring all high schools to offer CS. Technically, Washington has done this through SB 5088 in 2019. However, as we have seen, this legislation has not been as effective as expected. In 2022-23, the deadline for schools to implement this requirement, only 47% of our schools had a student enrolled in CS. Further, this rate has leveled off. While there are technicalities affecting the reporting of this percentage, including timing, the definition of a high school, district versus high school availability, and offering versus enrolling. However, Washington's results are so far away from the spirit of the policy that I rated it as a yellow. Can count toward graduation. This is something that OSPI has done a great job to make CS courses count as a third year math or science for graduation purposes. This shows the list of CS courses that could count as CS or could count as a third year math or science. This shows the 2021-22 version, although the list gets updated yearly. The final policy we will discuss is whether we allow computer science to satisfy an admission requirement at a higher education institution. While we technically allow this, so the official rating is green, I rated Washington's implementation as yellow. While all computer science courses can be counted as a third-year math or science for graduation purposes, our four-year college and universities do not recognize any CS course as a third-year math or science. The only exception is that AP-CSA may be used as a senior level fourth-year math course, which is not required for graduation, but is required for college admission. Because of Washington's already crowded 24 credit system, and because many schools can only provide 6 credit hours a year, this forces many students to choose between taking CS or going to college. And this choice affects schools as well. It may just be a pet peeve of mine, but I believe that this implementation is the main reason why Washington still trails so many other states in high school CS education participation, especially among women. So that was my analysis of Washington's performance on the 10 policies covered by the state of CS. As I mentioned at the beginning of this section, there is considerable discussion among others in the computer science education advocacy community about what the policies the report should be promoting and tracking each year. So I want to deal with this issue on these next few slides. First of all, in defense of the current set of 10 policy recommendations, the report has exercised diplomacy in choosing policies that could receive bipartisan support in all 50 states. The 10 policies are also politician and government friendly, meaning the policies are designed to give these stakeholders the opportunity to win. Politicians and government officials always like to be told what a great job they are doing. An important example of this is DEI. While the report will report on metrics relative to DEI issues, it does not have a normative policy regarding it. I've also concluded that further policy recommendations for the budget for CS education is a no-win situation. Someone is always going to be unhappy. So while the report does a great job of raising the profile of computer science education policy, it is up to all of us to be sure these policies are implemented well. On this slide, I've included some computer science education policy recommendations from other organizations. The CS for All Washington page, of course, focuses on policy in Washington. There are 2 policy resources on the CSTA website and numerous ones on the ECEP website. I also tried brainstorming some of my own changes for the 10 policies and came up with the following. Thank you very much. If you do want to ask any questions of me, my email is panlaw@hotmail.com. You can also get a copy of this presentation either by scanning this QR code or going to this URL, tinyurl.com, state of CSCWA 25. And thank you very much again for your time, and thank you to Bellevue College.